Wanering, Mara Creek, Byrock, one-horse places in Western New South Wales that most of us have never heard of. But to these infants' children at Hillsborough Public School, those little towns are more than just dots on a map. They're home to kids just like them who could be facing a Christmas parched of its cheer by drought. To make sure the festive season lives up to its name, the school's 215 students are sending out box loads of food and toys to their new friends out west.
Honey.
Oh, some Australian honey. And some playing cards I can see in there.
What began as a storytelling session in the classroom about sheep dying in the drought has developed into the program that the kids have dubbed Adopt a Family. And these 5 and 6-year-olds are well aware why they're helping out others.
Because they haven't got enough money to buy them for themselves. Hot and very dry, and there's a drought. For the people out west, because they haven't got enough money to buy things.
Do you feel sorry for them?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's a big drought out there.
Teacher Carol Whiteside says the students are receiving a lesson they could never get from a blackboard.
I think they get a much broader understanding of what life is like outside their own little realm. They really are beginning to identify with what's going on out there.
For the kids out west, the Hillsborough Santa will be arriving with the goodies next week. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
"65 years ago, Agnes James graduated as a nurse from the Royal Newcastle. Today, at the age of 91, she returned to the hospital to remember a golden age of nursing.
I loved every minute of it. I liked the work and the companionship.
Book traces the many changes experienced by the nursing profession over the last century. It also deals with the more recent effects the earthquake had on the hospital and staff.
These nurses are extraordinary in that they have so much strength to deal with the things they have to face, but so much compassion to pass on to the people who are in need of a helping hand.
The book was built around the letters, photo albums and memories of many nurses who have worked at the Royal. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
O'Neill was in devastating form against Wollongong's Grant Billett and was on top from the outset. O'Neill wrapped up the first set without dropping a game and continued on his merry way in the second with excellent court coverage and power to burn. O'Neill's heavy forehand helped him to a straight sets win, 6-love, 6-1. Nicholls was equally impressive with his opponent not presenting much of a challenge. Nicholls also only conceded one game and his 6-love, 6-1 victory. The number 1 seed Jason Karsk found himself with an awkward first-round match against Troy Woods, who isn't a regular on the circuit. Although an easy 6-1, 6-1 scoreline looks impressive, Karsk wouldn't be too happy with the way he opened the tournament and will be hoping for a lift in performance as the event progresses. But the match of the day was between the second seed Mark Draper and unseeded Andrew Town. Draper lived up to his ranking in the first set, dropping only 2 games and seemed in control. But the Terrier Towns bit back to grab the second 6-4 with some superb passing shots and great scrambling. But the tall Draper, who struggled with his own game, prevailed in the third and deciding set and lived to fight another day with a 6-2, 4-6, 7-5 victory.
The coroner today began sifting through the evidence about the Dungog hostel fire. Chief Investigator Detective Michael De Bono told the court that the massive destruction that occurred at Palm Grove Hostel precluded finding any definite cause or origin of the fire. He said that no one has been connected with the lighting of the fire, either by admission or circumstantial evidence. Detective De Bono returned to the hostel after the fire. He said the bodies were the most badly burnt human remains he had ever seen. He also visited 2 undamaged rooms that had been occupied by 4 residents. Detective De Bono said the condition of these rooms was absolutely squalid. The sheets were almost black with dirt and the floor was littered with cigarette butts and dirty clothing. Most of the residents of Palm Grove Hostel were alcohol brain-damaged adults. They almost all smoked cigarettes, giving them ready access to matches and cigarette lighters. Detective De Bono expressed concern about the lack of professional supervision of the residents. He said the supervision ceased at 9 p.m. and resumed the following day about 6 or 7 a.m. He told the court that the hostel employed Spartan firefighting equipment which the residents were not competent to use. He also said the fire alarms that had been installed were no longer operative. Anne and Michael Wills lived 70 metres away from the hostel. The court was told Anne Wills learnt of the fire from a neighbour who heard screams from the hostel. Detective De Bono said that given all the prevailing conditions at Palm Grove Hostel, it is quite remarkable that Anne and Michael Wills felt confident enough to sleep while the hostel residents managed themselves throughout the night. Detective De Bono told the court that he fully believes that the unsatisfactory supervision arrangements at Palm Grove adversely reflect on every aspect of the hostel operated by Michael and Anne Wills. The inquest will continue tomorrow. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Such was the opposition to the new road across Wangi Point that protesters threw themselves in the path of bulldozers and the police. Only days before the local government elections in September, work began on the $450,000 project, despite the claims that it would destroy a sensitive rainforest pocket. But new Mayor Doug Carley halted work, a decision reinforced at last night's council meeting.
I was opposed to the road being continued to be constructed, and that construction stop and the road to be put back into its natural state.
But the council's decision to abandon the work and reallocate the funds to other projects doesn't sit well with independent alderman Bob Toussis. He wanted a community committee formed to discuss the road's future, but he says the Labor Party's dominance put paid to the idea.
I think it's totally hypocritical what happened last night. That is the basis of a community input, and they totally ignored it and voted against it.
The Mayor says he doesn't know how much it will cost to restore this area to its original condition. But some ratepayers say they resent that their money has been doubly wasted. First, to build a road that's now going nowhere, and second, to try and rub out any trace that this project ever existed.
Time and effort and money, because there was a plan in train for some time, and it's been probably going since 1982, signed by the Minister in April 91, and people come out to work on it, and then it was halted.
Mr Poole, who believes the road would have improved safety for the park users by redirecting traffic, says the residents won't rest with the council's decision.
The residents' committee here that will be, approaching the Minister to try and let him know what has been going on.
Yeah, where do you live? Yeah.
Why they don't use that?
Well, see, we Vice Chancellor as well. Vice Chancellor was stressing that he really likes to develop that area. The station here would help to.
It's a development by Jennings Healthcare Limited at Canwall. Glenmore offers 8 hectares of resort-standard indoor and outdoor facilities for elderly people who might at the moment be living alone in large homes from Newcastle to Sydney. Of greatest importance, though, is a 24 hours a day on-site nursing centre. Glenmore is a response by Jennings Healthcare Limited to government calls for lifestyle alternatives for the frail elderly.
It's not so much the affordability and the accessibility and the style and of independence and quality of life, but it's the fact that people have a security now that wasn't there before, and they have choices there that weren't there before.
Glenmore is the latest of a $250 million series of assisted living communities to be built by the company along the east coast. They'll help cater for people from their late 70s, a population group expected to reach 2.5 million over the next 40 years.
While the review was complimentary of dental services provided by the Area Community Health Service, it criticised those offered at the Royal Newcastle Hospital. The report says the Royal's dental unit needs to improve its efficiency and productivity.
The review has also recommended that we look at targeting our dental services more specifically to the disadvantaged in the Hunter Valley, and that those who are able to use private services should be encouraged to do so.
Changes have also been suggested for emergency dental services in Newcastle.
The report recommends transferring the Department of Oral Surgery from the Royal Newcastle Hospital to the John Hunter Hospital so that we will have a full 24-hour emergency service for serious dental injuries and facial fractures at the John Hunter Hospital.
Meanwhile, supporters of the Wall's End picket line say they will continue to maintain their vigil outside that hospital. While at Curry, residents who fear their hospital may be the next to go will meet with Dr Smythe on Thursday. Today, he said he is not anticipating any further cuts to services at Curry. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Such is the reputation of the Civic Theatre in the performing arts world that Dame Joan Sutherland came to Newcastle in July to voice her support for the refurbishment of the city landmark. But the local performers complain that the rental makes it almost impossible for them to tread the Civic's celebrated boards. In a report to Lord Mayor John McNaughton, which has been obtained by NBN, the Hunter Association of Performing Arts Companies asserts the hiring of the theatre costs more than $2,000 a night. Throwing in other essential costs, local companies have to pay out as much for the Civic as they would for the Opera Theatre at the Sydney Opera House.
The Civic has all the things that is needed for amateur theatre. Why then aren't the people of Newcastle able to use it?
The report also claims Newcastle is missing out on tours by such groups as the Sydney Symphony Orchestra because of the Civic's hiring costs. Association members say the Civic is already underutilised and they're wondering just who will be able to afford to use the theatre once the $12 million in restoration work is done. The report reads, if Newcastle is to put its collective hand in its pocket to refurbish the Civic Theatre, at least Newcastle organisations should be able to use the venue at a reasonable cost.
I think it's a wonderful theatre, but if I'm not going to be able to use it, I don't think I'll pay for the refurbishment.
The association wants a committee formed to look at the present policies and the future of the Civic, a request the Lord Mayor intends to follow up.
It's unfortunate it can't be used by more people, and we need to overcome those problems, and they can be overcome and they will be overcome.
Of the hundreds of bales on offer at Newcastle's Primac Wool Centre, only one was fleecing everyone's interest. 100 kilos of extra superfine merino wool from Don Tully's property Tarrangower, northeast of Armidale. This is the cream of Don's crop, a painstaking selection of the best of fleeces from his 11,000 sheep.
It has to be good length for its quality, it has to be bright, it has to be stylish.
The wool industry has had a disastrous year with the collapse of the floor or reserve price. Today, average prices were around $6 a kilo. That was with one notable exception. As Don Tully looked on, Japanese and Italian bidders sent the price to $410 a kilo, $41,000 for one bale of wool, an Australian mainland record. Italian fabric company Loro Piana bought the wool to be used for making suits. Although paying dearly for the product, Piana has the honour to use what must be one of the best fleeces in the world. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The fury of a tropical cyclone at its height. And 3 days later, the devastation it's caused. The death toll from Cyclone Val is now reported to have reached 8, and the first eyewitnesses are back.
I have never been so scared in my life. That's what it boiled down to. The devastation is horrendous. The first night I actually, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I packed my kit together and I went into the bathroom of the hotel and sat in the shower.
The Orion crew assessed the damage from the air. The northern sides of both Upolu and Savaii were particularly badly hit.
Some areas were completely obliterated. There was nothing left standing whatsoever. Other areas there were roofs taken off and only walls left remaining.
There's vast areas where 90% of the vegetation feel like it's all been stripped off the trees at ground level.
Already, France has pledged 10 tonnes of food and equipment. Britain has pledged $160,000 so far.
Shipping 38 million tonnes of coal a year, Newcastle is regarded a world coal export leader. Mr Hughes says major Japanese customers want more of the Hunter's coal, but they have their doubts about the port's ability to meet demand. An overhaul of work practices at the loaders has boosted annual exports by 20%, a result that has not been lost on consumers.
They have had previous plans to attempt to diversify away from Australian coal, and they can see that what we're doing is going to make that very difficult indeed. So we hope that leads to more tonnage for Newcastle and therefore more jobs for Hunter people.
Mr Hughes says the constant demand is likely to see an expansion of Port Waratah coal loading facilities within the next few years. The company is celebrating its 15th year on the port. While hoping to secure a profitable future, it has also invested in a valuable link with Newcastle's past. A donation of $60,000 from PWCS has enabled the Newcastle Council to purchase an historic painting of the settlement as it was 173 years ago. The Joseph Lycett work depicts the view from what is now Fort Scratchley back over what was known as Prospect Hill, now heavily built on. The painting will be officially unveiled tonight at its new home in the Newcastle Region Art Gallery.
By any terms, it's a very valuable painting, but it's so particularly appropriate to Newcastle, and it gives us now 3 of the oldest paintings in Australia in this gallery.
The odorous slick washed ashore, triggering beach closures and a rash of tests on suspect water and grease samples. Late yesterday, the Water Board conceded the material had been flushed from its Burwood Beach ocean outfall and awaited the outcome of laboratory tests for faecal coliform or raw sewage levels.
It's all the counts come in showing that it was safe for swimming, although there was some grease on the beach, and the grease comes from the lifestyle we lead. We put our fat and our grease down the sink, and it'll end up on the beach. So the best way to handle the grease is don't put the fat in the sink in the first place.
Independent tests commissioned by NBN through Newcastle University identified faecal coliform levels attached to samples of floating grease balls.
I wouldn't like to have been swimming there.
We found some fetal coliforms on the grease itself, and that occurs most times when you've got floatable objects. The nasties will attach themselves to it, and they'll find their way to the beach.
A third source of test results from the City Council's Health Department identified the presence of faecal coliforms, but confirmed they were at a safe level. While all conceded the smell of the slick was offensive, the board defended the ocean outfall system and will press ahead with a $15 million secondary treatment plant at Burwood Beach, which should come online next June.
Basically, the facts are that the beaches now are far, far cleaner than they've ever been, and with secondary treatment coming online next year, they'll be even better.
With the closure of the Wallsend and Royal Newcastle Hospital casualty wards, the Mater Hospital, along with the John Hunter and Belmont, forms the front line for urgent medical treatment. It's also the regional centre for cancer treatment and palliative care. According to the hospital's Medical Staff Council, funds are inadequate and patient care is suffering.
The lack of beds, the emergency service difficulties, the problems at the hospice. These ambulances have been redirected to other hospitals because our casualty and accident emergency services have been full. The Mater medical, the Mater surgical and the Mater ancillary staff are stressed by a hospital that's filled with acute medical and surgical patients.
Doctors say the waiting list for radiotherapy is growing because the hospital's linear accelerators are understaffed. Terminal and post-operative patients often wait for hours on casualty trolleys before being allocated a bed.
We would like to give our patients Rolls-Royce medicine, but we've got the money for a Morris Minor at the moment.
The doctors stress they're doing the best they can. Are these acceptable circumstances?
No comment.
The kitchen of the home was severely damaged, but quick action saved the house. With the flames doused, the decorated engine picked up Santa and resumed spreading a little cheer around the neighbourhood.